So I apologize in advance if I manage to create some glitches, but I'm sure that with Melissa's assistance, we can work through them together. We have some really interesting material prepared today for everybody on acceptance following a traumatic brain injury. And you will notice that during the presentation, we'll stop and we'll ask questions of you, and you're welcome to participate to the extent you feel comfortable. This is a public, this is not a private setting, so feel free to share to the extent that you feel comfortable. And Melissa, yeah, I think this is also being recorded, just for everybody to know.
Yeah, sorry, I meant to mention that it is being recorded. We cannot see the participants' names, so your names are not being recorded. All that's being recorded is the speakers tonight. However, if you do ask a question, you are welcome to ask questions. Just type them in the chat box, or you can raise your hand and I can unmute you and then you can ask a question. But just be aware that that will be recorded. Again, your name will not show up because I will be reading out the question. But just the question itself will end up in the webinar. So just to be aware of that.
And we'll give a lot of content, and yes, we'll have breaks for questions, but at the same time, feel free to just fire away questions if there's a lot of stuff going on and you just want to take a moment and receive an answer at that point. Okay. So I am going to share the slides now. Oops, yeah, it's this one here. Okay. Are you able to see a slide? Just let me know. Yeah, it's working perfect. So as I mentioned earlier, the presentation today is an acceptance following a traumatic brain injury. Hailey and myself will present, and the work has, and some of you may have participated in the past. The presentation itself has been developed by myself and Dr. Moisel, also clinical neuropsychologist, heavily involved in the process, but she wasn't able to present today. So yeah, hopefully you enjoy this new information, as well as some items that are here for review. So today we'll take a look at what is brain injury. We will watch a brief video about emotions and how that ties into some acceptance work. We'll talk about what is the acceptance. I should probably remove the 15-minute break. That's from before. We won't have a break today. And we'll just, after talking about acceptance, we'll go into some emotions, work on emotions, in particular grief. We'll mention anger, and throughout this presentation, we'll talk about strategies. And some of them you'll notice that we can do together, depending on how the video aspect of it allows. And some of them will just Hailey and I will walk you through them. So let's talk about the brain. This is a very powerful, but also very vulnerable system. It weighs about 3 pounds. It has 200 billion nerve cells and 1 trillion supporting cells. It is nourished by a dense network of blood vessels, and it is protected by the skull. And there are 3 membranes just below it. It is soft.
Yeah. I mean, interrupt. I think you need to just move the slides up. If you're on slide 3, we see 1 and 2 and a half of the third one. So I don't know if you can put it on the slideshow viewing.
Sorry, so what do you see right now?
The acceptance following traumatic brain injury slide is at the forefront, and then on the side is the other 2 slides.
Really? Oh, I thought it went, so now we can see ourselves, right? I apologize to everybody. For me, it looks like a... There we go.
Perfect.
It works now? Yeah. I did nothing different, but it works. That's what matters. Okay. Keep me posted if anything else needs to be edited. Okay, so back to the brain. It is soft, it is pliable, it is slippery. And the consistency sometimes compared to a tofu or butter. So it is within the skull, and actually within the skull, it floats within a cerebrospinal fluid. Because the brain is so soft, and because it is actually floating, and thus it can move around, tiny amount, but it can move around within the skull cavity, it is actually particularly susceptible to strong forces. And these are impacts to the head or to other parts of the body. And these forces can cause brain to jostle around and bump against the skull. Closed head injuries occur when there is a direct hit to the head, or when the head is subjected to strong forces that cause the brain to move around inside the skull. So this is when we have an impact to another part of the body that causes our skull to move and the brain to jostle inside. It can also happen in times of sudden acceleration or deceleration or even rotational forces. The important thing to remember here is because these forces and hits can be so diverse, so different, no brain injury and no concussion in particular is exactly alike. And this is just a little bit more about the brain. So this shows the layers underneath the skull that covers our brain, and a little bit how where it's located in comparison to other parts of our head. A lot of this you probably guys already know. And these are the forces that can result in shifting of the brain inside of the skull. And you can see how it floats. This slide is just to show you that there are different kinds of brain injury. And they can be non-traumatic, which means they're typically acquired in some other way rather than through a hit to the body or the head, or traumatic. So in the non-traumatic ones, we typically see stroke, tumor, infections, anoxia, so loss of travel of oxygen to the brain, metabolic disorders, even some immune disorders. And traumatic, this is where we see impact of the body that results in changes in the brain. And in that domain, brain injuries are rated on a scale of mild to moderate and then to severe based on these very specific indicators. When looking at what happens at a time of acute recovery versus more prolonged recovery, this slide shows that there is a difference in terms of concussion and those injuries deemed more moderate to severe. So in acute stages, when it comes to concussion, usually we see effects of mechanical forces from this concussion that disrupt the functioning of delicate brain cells and structures. And the most notable difference at this time is that between concussions and moderate to severe brain injury is that moderate to severe brain injuries come also with some structural changes like bleeding in the brain. In a more prolonged stage of recovery, many, many months beyond, maybe sometimes years, in concussions, direct effects of concussions start to slowly fade, but symptoms can be maintained by many, many other factors, and symptoms can persist. In a more moderate to severe brain injury, the symptoms seen can persist because there are structural changes in the brain. The point is that when symptoms do persist, despite the nature of the brain injury, things are complicated, and that's the bottom line. So what to do? That's the question, what to do with now perhaps a bit of a messy picture because we have many factors contributing to what's happening. And what it's important to remember at that time when the things persist is that there's no magic bullet that will fix these prolonged physical, cognitive, or emotional symptoms following a concussion, moderate to severe brain injury, because prolonged symptoms tend to be non-specific and can have multiple causes. So the important thing is to start thinking about more of a multidisciplinary approach to management of these symptoms. But the good news is that becoming familiar with your symptoms, patterns, and triggers, adopting effective self-care and coping strategies, and seeking appropriate treatment as needed can help reduce or eliminate those prolonged symptoms.
Great. So what can you do to help yourself? So what we're going to do, we have to start at the bottom with self-care.
Am I going to? There I go.
Thank you. So I'd like to just take a moment to stop and to talk about self-care. So firstly, how do you define self-care? So feel free to put your answer in the chat or raise your hand if you'd like to share. Great.
Anyone have anything they want to put in the chat? Or I can unmute you if you raise your hand up. Maybe repeat the question one more time.
Yeah, of course. So my question is, how do you define self-care? So what does self-care look like for you?
Rest, say no when you need.
Yes, definitely. It's a great one.
Oh, and then somebody just raised their hand. Now I have to allow them to talk. Hold on. Oh, raise your hand again if you raised your hand. Nope. So Donna's saying taking time each day to make sure your needs are being met. It's a great one.
That's awesome, Donna.
Yep. And I'm going to say eating properly, and exercising when possible, not always possible.
Great, awesome. Thank you so much for everyone that participated there. You guys provided some great examples. Yes, great. So just to summarize, with self-care, we want to do things such as managing sleep. So that can look like sleep hygiene, sleep logging, so on. Also, checking your diet and nutrition, so making sure you're eating properly. Another self-care thing is to engage in some physical activity. So physical activity that you can tolerate. So with this, you can even start small. So even if you're able to walk to the end of your driveway and back and slowly build that up just based on what you can tolerate. And then also pacing. So you can use pacing to manage your mental and physical fatigue. So for example, scheduling regular breaks that you take when you're feeling fatigued or pain. All right, and then also it's important to manage your stress, mood, and anxiety with activity scheduling. So with this, you can schedule activities such as taking a bath, going on a walk, that kind of stuff. So you introduce activities that will help to improve your mood and reduce anxiety, that kind of stuff in any given day. Also, develop other positive coping strategies to help improve your mood, manage anxiety, and increase stress resilience. That can look like mindfulness, it could be gratitude journals, or practicing acceptance and self-compassion, which is actually something we're really going to focus on today. Awesome. So now we'd like to share a video with you guys. So we could Awesome. So it's on The Gift and the Power of Emotional Courage by Susan David.
Okay, and I will try to do this right now.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bear with me for a second. Okay.
Having done presentations, I always find this the most stressful part when I have to switch screens over. But I know everybody is lovely and patient, and I thank you for that.
I appreciate everybody's patience. And this video is about 15 minutes long and highlights some very important and interesting information. And once the video is over, we'll stop for a moment and make sure that we field any questions. Okay.
Hello, everyone. Sawubona. In South Africa, where I come from, Sawubona is the Zulu word for hello. There's a beautiful and powerful intention behind the word, because Sawubona literally translated means, I see you, and by seeing you, I bring you into being. So beautiful. Imagine being greeted like that. But what does it take in the way we see ourselves, our thoughts, our emotions, and our stories that help us to thrive in an increasingly complex and fraught world? This crucial question has been at the center of my life's work, because how we deal with our inner world drives everything, every aspect of how we love, how we live, how we parent, and how we lead. The conventional view of emotions as good or bad, positive or negative, is rigid, and rigidity in the face of complexity is toxic. We need greater levels of emotional agility for true resilience and thriving. My journey with this calling began not in the hallowed halls of a university, but in the messy, tender business of life. I grew up in the white suburbs of apartheid South Africa, a country and community committed to not seeing, to denial. It's denial that makes 50 years of racist legislation possible, while people convince themselves that they are doing nothing wrong. And yet, I first learned of the destructive power of denial at a personal level, before I understood what it was doing to the country of my birth. My father died on a Friday. He was 42 years old and I was 15. My mother whispered to me to go and say goodbye to my father before I went to school. So I put my backpack down and walked the passage that ran through to where the heart of our home, my father lay dying of cancer. His eyes were closed, but he knew I was there. In his presence, I had always felt seen. I told him I loved him, said goodbye, and headed off for my day. At school, I drifted from science to mathematics to history to biology, as my father slipped from the world. From May to July to September to November, I went about with my usual smile. I didn't drop a single grade. When asked how I was doing, I would shrug and say, okay. I was praised for being strong. I was the master of being okay. But back home, we struggled. My father hadn't been able to keep his small business going during his illness, and my mother alone was grieving the love of her life, trying to raise 3 children, and the creditors were knocking. We felt as a family financially and emotionally ravaged, and I began to spiral down, isolated, fast. I started to use food to numb my pain, binging and purging, refusing to accept the full weight of my grief. No one knew, and in a culture that values relentless positivity, I thought that no one wanted to know. But one person did not buy into my story of triumph over grief. My 8th grade English teacher fixed me with burning blue eyes as she handed out blank notebooks. She said, "Write what you're feeling. Tell the truth. Write like nobody's reading." And just like that, I was invited to show up authentically to my grief and pain. It was a simple act, but nothing short of a revolution for me. It was this revolution that started in this blank notebook 30 years ago that shaped my life's work, the secret, silent correspondence with myself. Like a gymnast, I started to move beyond the rigidity of denial into what I've now come to call emotional agility. Life's beauty is inseparable from its fragility. We are young until we are not. We walk down the streets sexy until one day we realize that we are unseen. We nag our children and one day realize that there is silence where that child once was, now making his or her way in the world. We are healthy until a diagnosis brings us to our knees. The only certainty is uncertainty, and yet we are not navigating this frailty successfully or sustainably. The World Health Organization tells us that depression is now the single leading cause of disability globally, outstripping cancer, outstripping heart disease. And at a time of greater complexity, unprecedented technological, political, and economic change, we are seeing how people's tendency is more and more to lock down into rigid responses to their emotions. On the one hand, we might obsessively brood on our feelings, getting stuck inside our heads, hooked on being right, or victimized by our news feed. On the other, we might bottle our emotions, pushing them aside, and permitting only those emotions deemed legitimate. In a survey I recently conducted with over 70,000 people, I found that a third of us, a third, either judge ourselves for having so-called bad emotions, like sadness, anger, or even grief, or actively try to push aside these feelings. We do this not only to ourselves, but also to people we love, like our children. We may inadvertently shame them out of emotions seen as negative, jump to solution, and fail to help them to see these emotions as inherently valuable. Normal, natural emotions are now seen as good or bad. And being positive has become a new form of moral correctness. People with cancer are automatically told to just stay positive. Women to stop being so angry. And the list goes on. It's a tyranny. It's a tyranny of positivity. And it's cruel, unkind, and ineffective. And we do it to ourselves, and we do it to others. If there's one common feature of brooding, bottling, or forced positivity, it's this: they are all rigid responses. And if there's a single lesson we can learn from the inevitable fall of apartheid, it is that rigid denial doesn't work. It's unsustainable for individuals, for families, for societies. And as we watch the ice caps melt, it is unsustainable for our planet. Research on emotional suppression shows that when emotions are pushed aside or ignored, they get stronger. Psychologists call this amplification, like that delicious chocolate cake in the refrigerator. The more you try to ignore it, the greater its hold on you. You might think you're in control of unwanted emotions when you ignore them, but in fact, they control you. Internal pain always comes out. Always. And who pays the price? We do. Our children, our colleagues, our communities. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not anti-happiness. I like being happy. I'm a pretty happy person. But when we push aside normal emotions to embrace false positivity, we lose our capacity to develop skills to deal with the world as it is, not as we wish it to be. I've had hundreds of people tell me what they don't want to feel. They say things like, I don't want to try because I don't want to feel disappointed. Or I just want this feeling to go away. I understand, I say to them, but you have dead people's goals. Only dead people never get unwanted or inconvenienced by their feelings. Only dead people never get stressed, never get broken hearts, never experience the disappointment that comes with failure. Tough emotions are part of our contract with life. You don't get to have a meaningful career or raise a family or leave the world a better place without stress and discomfort. Discomfort is the price of admission to a meaningful life. So, how do we begin to dismantle rigidity and embrace emotional agility? As that young schoolgirl, when I leaned into those blank pages, I started to do away with feelings of what I should be experiencing, and instead started to open my heart to what I did feel: pain and grief and loss and regret. Research now shows that the radical acceptance of all of our emotions, even the messy, difficult ones, is the cornerstone to resilience, thriving, and true, authentic happiness. But emotional agility is more than just an acceptance of emotions. We also know that accuracy matters. In my own research, I found that words are essential. We often use quick and easy labels to describe our feelings. I'm stressed is the most common one I hear. But there's a world of difference between stress and disappointment, or stress and that knowing dread of I'm in the wrong career. When we label our emotions accurately, we are more able to discern the precise cause of our feelings. And what scientists call the readiness potential in our brain is activated, allowing us to take concrete steps. But not just any steps, the right steps for us. Because our emotions are data. Our emotions contain flashing lights to things that we care about. We tend not to feel strong emotion to stuff that doesn't mean anything in our worlds. If you feel rage when you read the news, that rage is a signpost, perhaps, that you value equity and fairness, and an opportunity to take active steps to shape your life in that direction. When we are open to the difficult emotions, we are able to generate responses that are values aligned. But there's an important caveat. Emotions are data, they are not directives. We can show up to and mine our emotions for their values without needing to listen to them. Just like I can show up to my son in his frustration with his baby sister, but not endorse his idea that he gets to give her away to the first stranger he sees in a shopping mall. We own our emotions, they don't own us. When we internalize the difference between how I feel in all my wisdom and what I do in a values-aligned action, we generate the pathway to our best selves via our emotions. So, what does this look like in practice? When you feel a strong, tough emotion, don't race for the emotional exits. Learn its contours, show up to the journal of your hearts. What is the emotion telling you? And try not to say I am, as in I am angry or I am sad. When you say I am, it makes you sound as if you are the emotion, whereas you are you, and the emotion is a data source. Instead, try to notice the feeling for what it is. I'm noticing that I'm feeling sad, or I'm noticing that I'm feeling angry. These are essential skills for us, our families, our communities. They are also critical to the workplace. In my research, when I looked at what helps people to bring the best of themselves to work, I found a powerful key contributor: individualized consideration. When people are allowed to feel their emotional truth, engagement, creativity, and innovation flourish in the organization. Diversity isn't just people, it's also what's inside people, including diversity of emotion. The most agile, resilient individuals, teams, organizations, families, communities are built on an openness to the normal human emotions. It's this that allows us to say, what is my emotion telling me? Which action will bring me towards my values? Which will take me away from my values? Emotional agility is the ability to be with your emotions with curiosity, compassion, and especially the courage to take values-connected steps. When I was little, I would wake up at night terrified by the idea of death. My father would comfort me with soft pats and kisses, but he would never lie. "We all die, Susie," he would say. "It's normal to be scared." He didn't try to invent a buffer between me and reality. It took me a while to understand the power of how he guided me through those nights. What he showed me is that courage is not an absence of fear. Courage is fear walking. Neither of us knew that in 10 short years he would be gone. And the time for each of us is all too precious and all too brief. But when our moment comes to face our fragility in that ultimate time, it will ask us, are you agile? Are you agile? Let the moment be an unreserved yes. A yes born of a lifelong correspondence with your own heart. And in seeing yourself, because in seeing yourself, you are also able to see others too. The only sustainable way forward in a fragile, beautiful world. Sawubona, and thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Right. So I'm wondering, I just wanted to ask the group if anyone had any thoughts or questions about the video that we just watched. Feel free to write in the chat or put up your hand if you'd like to speak. Love to hear from you. Oh, Melissa, you're muted.
So one of our members is asking if we could get the link to the video. Is it possible to send that out or pop it in the chat? Oh, you know what? I can pop it in the chat box. So I will do that now. I thought it was a great video, very powerful.
Yes, I just want to answer, yes, you can definitely just put the link. It's a publicly available TED Talk. And we also think very powerful, and you will notice as a group that we will review some of these concepts as we continue talking today. But yeah, let's see if there are any other comments for Hailey or I.
It's funny, I remember you showing that video last year. And I was very engaged. Watching again, I'm like, oh, I've forgotten this. That. It's nice to have that reminder of noticing your, not letting your emotion be who you are, define you in that moment.
Yeah, it's a kind of video that I think that provides a lot of information, a lot of context that can be oftentimes discerned mostly if you see it multiple times. So I think it's always going to be relevant. I think there might be a comment there.
Reminds me that what we resist for those who, oh, there's a few comments. Sorry, it moved while I was reading the first one. Reminds me we resist persists. What we can feel, we can heal.
That's awesome.
And the other one is Emotional Agility is her book and available for free from the public library. or the library app in audio for those who have issues reading due to ABI. Oh, that's a great tip. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
And that comment that what we resist persists, but we can heal is, I think, very consistent with her message. And it's about also, once we are able to open up to those emotions, we start to learn that they don't own us. We then can start learning how to own them and take the next step, because now we have data and more information about our personal needs.
We have one more comment come in. I like that she's basically honoring our feelings for what they are. So many times I feel in one thing better by focusing on positive emotions instead of learning and experiencing.
Yes. Yeah. So she is, yeah, in agreement with that, saying that let's honor those emotions. Running away from them will, as you have said earlier, to persist. As we honor them, we can start to open up to the experience, and also we can start to learn that always feeling good is a not very realistic goal. No matter how good things are in life, there's still some painful emotions that are just part of our evolutionary system. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But honoring that and saying, hey, this is normal, is definitely part of her message.
Yeah.
Oh, I love our members because we're so wise and so open to sharing resources. We also know now she also has a great Instagram, posing questions, quotes, etc. So follow her on Instagram to get more information.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So, okay, so yeah, sounds like that video very much resonated. And yes, we have shown it a few years, and we also think that this is the kind of video that we want to keep on seeing and being reminded of what it is to have a range of emotions and be open to them. Okay, so I'll share
Okay.
the presentation again, right?
Great.
Okay.
So this is a nice transition to our topic of acceptance. So to start, I'd like to ask the group, when you hear the word acceptance, what's your first reaction? So what does that word mean to you? Feel free to like just write that in the chat if you'd like. Love to hear from you. So what does acceptance mean to you?
Just a reminder, if you raise your hand, I can unmute you. So if you're not comfortable typing, no worries. We're not going to unmute everyone at once, just because then there's always background noise. But certainly if you want to unmute yourself to have a dialogue, that's always an option. Okay, a few comments are coming through.
Okay.
So here we go. My knee-jerk reaction hates the word because it makes me think that it's just giving up, but actually it's more like working with what you've got.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know if you see another member's asking if you could just narrow the question.
Of course, yeah. So maybe the question, I'll narrow it to, what does the word acceptance mean to you? If hopefully that's a little bit more to the point. So I see someone asking, can you narrow the question? It's quite general. In what context? So just in general, I guess, when you hear the word acceptance, like, what does that mean to you? Like, how do you interpret that word?
I'm going to say being okay with who you are and what you're experiencing in the moment. That's what it means to me.
Okay, awesome.
And then one of our members, nice to see your name, we miss you, says self-care and to like yourself. Being open to who you are now and what you are capable of today. And it depends on the context. I can be good or not, depending on the context.
Great. Awesome. Yeah. So we have a little bit of varying responses here, which is great. So all of the responses given are technically correct when it comes to defining acceptance. But for the purposes of this talk, when we talk about acceptance, like following an injury or accident, we use acceptance to mean things like, we can go to the next slide. Awesome. So we've highlighted these words here. So things like giving permission, making space for, allowing, to make peace with, and so on. So we're going to focus on these kind of words to define acceptance in our context. So when we think about acceptance differently from what the dictionary definition might be.
Oops. And in addition to how acceptance is defined clinically, it's also important to know that acceptance is a process, and it's a process that allows you to accept reality as it is in order to move forward with what you have. It involves dropping the struggle against what you can change and opening up and making space for those painful emotions and feelings, just like we heard in the video, allowing them to come as they naturally do, honoring them, and kind of dropping the need to get rid of them as soon as we can. The idea is that we want to take a look at the information they do provide to us without judgment. And one way to do that is to practice compassion. So to kind of recap that, acceptance does not mean you have to sit back and passively take whatever comes your way and tolerate it. It does not mean you have to like or agree with what you're accepting. Rather, acceptance is about letting go of what you cannot change and refocusing all that energy on what you can do to build a life that is worth living in accordance with your values and goals. And acceptance gives us the skills to stop getting tangled up in our thoughts and feelings, to start thinking clearly and productively, and to move forward with what is important to us. And an example of that is, I'm just going to put this slide on just for now, but Hailey, I'll do the previous exercise. So there's an example of how we tend to approach the external world we live in. And also there is an internal world that we all experience. So I'll walk you through an example. The idea is that there's no doubt that our problem-solving skills, which are very much verbal in nature, are actually a blessing. It's actually something that has gotten us through the evolutionary struggles to be here where we are today, as a species. However, there are times when they become a tool that's not the best used in that initial moment, but perhaps a bit later. So I'll walk you through an example. I just want to provide a bit of a trigger warning here if anyone is claustrophobic with this example. It may just trigger somebody, but also it may not. So, but I want to give that a little warning in advance. So I want you to imagine you went to sleep and woke up in a totally unfamiliar room with all of the exits locked. What would you do? Any thoughts? You can write them down in the chat.
While we're waiting, I'll answer. I would panic.
Yeah, maybe panic. That would be one of them. Yeah. Maybe start looking in, there's some windows. Maybe you can get out of the house, just kind of walking through the window. maybe making some phone calls if we have cell phone nowadays. See if we can get
skills are better. The problem solving skills are better than mine.
right. But so, and you're highlighting, Melissa, a very important point here. It's we are resorting to our problem solving to manage that external world, that space that we are in. So yes, you would almost certainly wonder how you got there, probably first, and then you would soon turn to task of getting out, right? And this is a problem solving. What what are all the options in front of me? What are the pros and cons? Can somebody see me? Can I call somebody, et cetera, et cetera. The bottom line is that you would be using only your verbal and symbolic skills, so problem solving skills, to formulate a plan that likely will succeed. So this example demonstrates our evolutionary advantage as humans. We have been able to prevail despite being weak, slow, and poorly defended if we compare ourselves, for example, to a bear. So we have this skill that has been very powerful and very important to us. However, that same problem-solving verbal skills can pose a disadvantage in a different situation. So I'll walk you through another example. Suppose that instead of being trapped in this room, unfamiliar room, you woke up one morning trapped in a feeling of intense anxiety. What would you do? I'll give people a couple of moments. How would you try to escape that anxiety?
I would say deep breaths.
Yeah, some deep diaphragmatic breathing to regulate how we feel when we are anxious.
See if anybody else has anything they would do. Call a friend. Good one.
Call a friend, yes. Reach out for support, yes. That's a very good one. Yeah, and what you guys are highlighting is also some problem solving. You'd likely ruminate. How did I get here in the first place? Why am I feeling the way I'm feeling? And then again, you'd likely soon find yourself in a situation and yourself in a task of getting out, finding a way out of this situation. You'd apply the same problem solving skills, verbal abilities that you apply to that physical environment, now to this very psychological and internal experience and environment. The outcome being sought is the same. Escaping the situation, escaping the feelings. Right? So we're trying to escape that feeling of intense anxiety.
One of our members is just asking to quickly recap.
Sorry?
Oh, one of our members is just saying she missed kind of that piece. You can explain where they woke up. Where did they wake up in their bed? Where did they wake up with this feeling?
Yeah, I think it all depends. I think it's you can if you're imagining a situation, it can be anywhere. The point of that second part is that the space now is that intense anxiety. So you're trapped in that intense anxiety. So it can be in your bed, it can be in your anywhere else. Okay. So trying to escape it using your problem solving skills, while logical, it can be harmful when we think about it, because sometimes we might try to, escape the feeling of that intense anxiety by avoiding situations such as relationships, because they might be giving us anxiety. However, by not being in those very relationships, we might be feeling more and more lonely, which triggers further our emotional struggle. So in summary, looking at these examples, it is quite possible to get out of the locked room and leave it behind, because then it's done. But in contrast, the very attempt to escape from a difficult emotion may also exacerbate it. And this brings us back to acceptance and the work that we are doing. So I'll turn it to Hailey now.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. So maybe if we can take the slide down, that would be great. And then everybody can see me a little bit clearer. Okay, awesome. So I'd like to do
Sorry, I was just going to ask everybody to pin the speaker if you're able to do that. And that way, Hailey will be nice and big on your screen while she does this activity. So in the corner, there's a view. If you click on the view and you can hit speaker, and then you'll see Hailey taking over your screen.
Thanks, Melissa. Okay, wonderful. So we'll get started. So I'd like to do an exercise together. So emotional and physical pain and discomfort are a part of our life. We can't get rid of difficult thoughts and emotions completely, but Dr. Budisin and I are hoping to convince you that by learning to change the relationship you have with your emotional and physical pain, you can decrease your suffering. So this exercise is called the Clipboard Exercise, hence why I'm holding a clipboard. So I'd like everyone to just take a moment to bring to mind all of the difficult thoughts, images, memories, and feelings that you've been struggling with. I'm going to use a clipboard to demonstrate this, but I want all of you to participate as well. And because I don't have clipboards for everyone, given that we're doing this virtually, I'd like you to imagine that the palms of your hands are your clipboard. Okay? So imagine all of those difficult thoughts, feelings, memories that you've been struggling with for so long are written on your clipboard or on the palms of your hands. So take a moment to look at the palms of your hands and imagine them filled with the words and images that run through your mind and the feelings that leave you suffering. Now, I want you to hold your hands up in front of your face so that you can't see me anymore. So like this. Bring your palms so close to your face that your palms are almost touching your nose. Just like it feels when these thoughts and feelings become overwhelming and distressing. Now, keeping your hands up in front of your face, what do you think it would be like to have a conversation with me while you're all caught up in these thoughts and feelings? Probably pretty difficult. Do you feel connected with me? Engaged with me? Are you able to read my expression on my face? No, probably not. And what's the view of your room like when you're caught up in all this stuff? You probably can't see anything but your hands. So, if the rest of us were doing a silent Macarena right now, would you notice? Probably not. So, while you're completely absorbed in all of this stuff, you're missing out on a lot. You're disconnected from the world around you, and you're disconnected from me. Notice, too, that while you're holding on tightly to all this stuff, you can't do the things that make your life work, like cooking dinner, driving a car, typing on a computer. So while you're all caught up in all this stuff, not only do you lose contact with the world around you and disconnect from your relationships, you also become incapable of doing things that make your life work. Now, there's something else I'd like to demonstrate here. If you feel comfortable and don't have any neck or shoulder problems, I'd like you to press your palms down on your legs like this, okay? So remembering that your palms are your clipboard filled with all the thoughts, images, and memories you've been dealing with for so long, I want you to push away with your palms down on your legs and push firmly. Don't push so hard that you hurt yourself, but just keep pushing. You really hate this stuff, right? You hate these thoughts and feelings. So push firmly and try to make them go away. Keep pushing. So here you are, trying very hard to push away these painful thoughts and feelings. You've been doing this for years, maybe. Are they going anywhere? Sure, you're keeping them at arm's length. But what's the cost to you? How does it feel? How do you think you'd be feeling after a whole day of this, or longer? Probably pretty tired. And now, if I asked you to type on a computer or drive a car while you're doing this, could you do it? No. And what's it like trying to have a conversation with me while you're doing this? Probably a little bit distracting. And maybe you feel a bit closed off or cut off from me as well. Okay, let's try something else. I'd like you to place your palms face up in your lap, just like this. How does this feel? A little bit less effort? How are your shoulders now? Maybe a bit more relaxed, a bit better? Notice now you're more free to invest your energy in doing something constructive. If I asked you to cook a meal or play the piano or drive a car, would you be able to do it? Yeah, you would. And what's it like having a conversation with me now, opposed to when you were doing this or doing this? So it's a lot easier now. Do you feel more engaged with me? Can you read my face? So notice too now that you have a more clear view of the room around you. So you can take it all in, even though these thoughts and feelings are still there in your lap. So of course, you don't want all of these painful thoughts and feelings. Nobody wants to experience unpleasant or uncomfortable things, but it's a part of life. We all have unpleasant realities outside of our control that we have to cope with. And now, by letting them sit in your lap and letting them be, they're still with you, but they're having much less impact on you. So this is what acceptance is all about. It's about learning skills that will help you handle painful thoughts and feelings far more effectively. And in such a way, they have much less impact on you and influence on you. So instead of doing this or this, you can do this. And by doing this, it not only allows you to be more connected with the world around you and to engage in what you're doing, but it also frees you up to be able to take effective action. So when you're no longer struggling with this stuff or feel absorbed in it, you're more free. You can put your energy into doing things that help you improve your quality of life. All right, and that's the activity. I hope you guys enjoyed that.
Hailey, I think we have one question.
Yes.
So, what if you know all of this logically, but it's difficult to drop thoughts, especially if you have perseveration after TBI? It's a great question.
That's a good question, because now you're starting to see the interaction of a brain injury with mental health. And the key to responding to that is to go back to one of our slides and also something that Susan shared. This is a process, right? So the idea is that to start opening to this experience, to start learning how it feels to feel a certain feeling, and to start to gather data from it. Okay, so we're focusing on emotions, not so much thoughts right away. It's about learning how it feels and start to gather data, and then start to see what we can do and problem solve through that data. Then use that strong skill of ours as human beings. But the initial play is say, okay, what is it that I'm feeling? And then you're now opening yourself up to a process of acceptance. So you'll be able to do it one time, but not the other time. And you'll be able to do it again. And it's that practice through assistance too. You might need some additional professional help, self-help books, but the idea is to now you practice that. I think we have another comment there.
We have mindful meditation has been helping me with this and acceptance. Would recommend a daily free 40-day mindfulness meditation with Tara Brack. If anyone is interested, here's the link. Again, you guys are so great with sharing resources and what's and sharing it with our community. So thank you so much for that. And the link are in the chat box if anybody wants to follow up with that.
And these resources are extra important and extra valuable when they come from somebody who has experienced benefit in it. So this is great. And mindfulness meditation does also have those components of acceptance. So it's a great combination with this work. So Hailey, I'm going to put up our slides. Maybe quickly go through next 2 points.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
All right. So does anyone know what you're supposed to do in order to survive quicksand? So if anyone wants to write in the chat, if anybody knows. So if you're stuck in quicksand, how do you survive?
Don't move.
Don't move. Relax and don't struggle. Yep. Awesome. Yeah. You guys got it. So you're right. So drop the fight. It's not just for unpleasant thoughts and feelings. So just like in our mental world, the worst thing you can do in quicksand is struggle. The way to survive is just lie back, spread out your arms and legs, and float on the surface. But this is very tricky because every instinct in your body is telling you to struggle. So if you do what comes naturally and instinctively, you'll drown. In the same way, psychologically, lying back and floating, as we're asking you to do with acceptance, is also tricky because it doesn't come naturally. But it's a lot less a physical and mental effort than struggling is. All right, so trying to get rid of this stuff is not only tiring, not only costly, but it doesn't even work. These thoughts and feelings are still showing up. So even though every instinct in your body tells you to resist, avoid, and push away, that strategy clearly isn't having the effect you want. It's really just making things worse. And we don't want to waste more time doing what doesn't work, right? So where do we go from here? Emotional and physical pain are a part of life. We can't get rid of difficult thoughts and emotions completely, but by changing the relationship we have with our emotional and physical pain, by learning to give up trying to avoid it, tolerate it, change it, get rid of it, so on, we can decrease our suffering. So just like surviving in quicksand, by stopping the fight against our painful thoughts and feelings, by giving up trying to control how we feel and think, we will actually start to feel better.
Okay. So let's take a look at this slide. Some of you may recall it from before. For some of you, it might be quite new. So this slide is, highlights a bit of a reality of emotional and physical pain and how that is part of our life. So scientists agree that there are approximately 9 basic human emotions. And I would like you to take a look at this slide and tell me anything that you notice about these 9 emotions.
Only one is happiness.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, there's love. Sorry.
Yeah, probably love is happy or positive.
Does anyone have anything else in the chat?
Yeah, and I think Melissa has pointed out something important. If you really look at this, 6 of these, oh, I think something came through.
Oh, I only see 7 emotions. We can read out the emotions.
Sure. I see love, anger, sadness, fear, disgust, curiosity, joy, shock, and guilt and shame together. So this will, yeah, I think there might be a question.
Strong emotions, and it may assist me with my inner emotion.
So the bottom line of this image is that it tells us a little bit about what it's like to be human. When we think about that, 6 of these 9 basic human emotions are actually painful, right? So when you think about it, we all live in the world where happiness, positivity is promoted at all times. But if we look at our basic emotions, 2/3 of them are painful emotions, what we would consider as painful. So we live in a feel-good society. We're told to feel good all the time, but how realistic is that, knowing this fact? We often lose sight of why emotions are important, and emotions are data. So that's their importance. And it's the relationship we have with emotions that can help us get to the data and then start to learn what to do with it. When we experience a strong emotion, it's our body's equivalent of flashing a light, a signal beacon to do something we care about. It's telling us perhaps some kind of a need is not being met. So we are there to listen to it. And if we label it correctly, we are more likely to get at the correct data that it represents. So in this picture, we see that certain emotions are quite complex. And the iceberg is a good analogy for it because we only see one small part of the on the surface. As we know, icebergs, a little bit of geography, are big bodies of ice, and they are found floating in the open ocean. What you see on the surface is just a tiny part of this iceberg. Actually, most of it is underneath it. And oftentimes, certain emotions, more complex ones, work that way too. For example, anger. Anger is an energizing emotion, and usually that's where our body represents and shows to the world we live in. It causes blood flow to our hands, making it easier to defend ourselves or attack as needed. It's a very evolutionary emotion when you think about it. It likely helps us survive. It increases our heart rate, adrenaline rushes. In other words, anger is often described as an emotion used to protect our raw feelings. So if we look at anger as a tip of the iceberg and consider how complex it is, we may start to realize that when that anger comes up for us or some other people, there might be some other things going on underneath. Maybe some embarrassment, feeling tricked, disappointed, maybe helpless. So by seeking to understand and accept anger, rather than suppress it and hide it, we can start to improve our marriages, friendships, and various other relationships. So as part of acceptance work in this context is to start accepting anger via exercises and start to enter that process so we can start getting to the data and those underlining raw feelings. This picture just further demonstrates how those more complex surface emotions look when we see on the surface. But that big circle, take a look at how many different kinds of emotions could be living underneath the surface of the ocean and could be feeding into any one of these surface emotions. So starting the acceptance work, starting to open ourselves to this experience can actually really unravel the world of various kinds of emotions and new data for us that we can work with as we move forward in our recovery. This slide is a very interesting slide, and it actually comes out of a research study. And it's also a tool that you can use as you are starting to work towards recognizing your emotions, because sometimes we recognize emotions on a very physical basis before we can actually put words to it. So let me walk you a little bit through this study. 701 participants were shown the silhouette of bodies alongside emotional words, emotional stories, movies, or facial expressions. These participants were then asked to color the bodily regions whose activity they felt increasing or decreasing while viewing those emotional images. Okay. Now, different emotions were consistently associated with distinct bodily locations. And this was actually consistent across several cultures. And the message the researchers gave was that these bodily states triggered by emotions underline our conscious emotional experience. So in other words, identifying a bodily experience, for example, cold arms, can begin to generate those felt emotions, and we can start naming them for the work in acceptance. Before I give more information on the slide, I thought that maybe there was a question.
Yeah, I was just going to ask Dr. Budisin, one of our members of the circle on the slide you had before, what is that circle of emotion called?
The wheel of emotions?
Yes. Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
I'm going to put that in the chat box as well for everybody. The wheel of emotions.
Yeah. Okay, so in this study, they found that there are certain bodily experiences associated with different emotions. So they're saying, one way to identify emotions is to actually name them, experience them, see how they're feeling. But another way to do that is actually by doing a body check, for example. And I'll walk you through some of the overall findings, which I think are very interesting. So the emotions you see there are anxiety, love, depression, contempt, pride, shame, envy, and they are associated with some specific patterns in the body. Oh, sorry, there's also, I started with a lower list. There's also anger, fear, disgust, happiness, sadness, surprise, and feeling neutral. Okay. So some kind of overlying findings is that most basic emotions were associated with sensations of elevated activity in the upper chest area. And this is probably associated with changes in your breathing rate as we experience an emotion. So in every emotion, we are starting to experience some changes in how fast we breathe. Sensations in the head were shared across all emotions, and this is probably reflective of those cognitive changes that we experience, and also it can be reflective of facial body movements as you're getting angry or as you're happy. So there's always some kind of a facial expression that goes with that. Sensations in the upper limbs were most prominent in anger and happiness, and this was very interesting and kind of consistent when you think of anger, where you're ready for fight or flight. So you have to use that upper body. And happiness, perhaps, you want to approach. Those are called as approach behaviors. You want to approach others. So in anger, it's one way. In happiness, more related to hugs, obviously, pre-pandemic, to highlight that. And in contrast, sensations of decreased activity in the limbs was associated with sadness. So decreased activity is like cold hands, for example. And it goes along with lack of motivation, at times of depression, lack of movement, difficulty initiating, feeling stuck. Our body kind of shuts down at the same time, and there is reduced blood flow. And then sensations in the digestive system and around the throat region were mainly associated with disgust. That kind of makes sense. And I found this very interesting. In contrast to all other emotions, happiness was associated with enhanced sensation all over our body. So to be happy, it takes everything out of us, because typically that's a sign. The information we are receiving from that emotion is that something's good, so keep at it, basically. So I noticed our time. Wow, it flies. We have 8 more minutes, and yes, we could probably sit here until tomorrow, but I'll give you just a very quick overview of a few things we wanted to cover here. So another emotion is grief. So we won't go into too much detail about that, but we did talk about it before as well. But the idea behind grief when we're recovering following a traumatic brain injury is that it's quite complex to identify sometimes, because as you can see on this slide, there's so many overlapping symptoms that can fall under different diagnoses. PTSD, TBI, and grief have overlap. So sometimes we might be focused on one thing when in fact there are few processes happening at the same time. In terms of grief, there are phases. So if we do identify this as part of what we are struggling with, it's about working through these phases. And I can just read them out, but they start oftentimes with denial, just saying, this never happened to me. But then we start realizing, hey, things are not going away. Life is still very different. Then we get into anger. And with time, we start to try to alter things. If I do this, maybe something else will happen. Disorganization kicks in, which is very interesting if after brain injury, difficulties concentrating, problem solving, organizing, we can ascribe it all to brain injury, but we might be also going through grief that kind of then compounds those cognitive difficulties. If things persist, there's despair, depression kicks in, and these processes can go back and forth. The aim is to work towards the acceptance. And once there, now you're in the process of working what you have in order to build the life that you want, that's worth living.
So there's a question in the chat going back a couple of slides where you had the people with the emotions kind of colored in. The question is it thermal mapping? Was blood flow mapping based on words relation?
Sorry, say it again. I didn't hear you quite.
Sorry, is it thermal mapping? So is it blood flow mapping based on the words relation? So,
I think, and I can send a link to this article too. It's not too long. If people are more interested in getting more information, and it was, I think, part of the way they were looking at this was blood flow was one of the indicators and activity in the body in that area.
They also just have a lovely comment. Wow, I thought it was going to be too long, but it flew by. It was fabulous.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
100%. Thank you so much.
Much appreciated. So maybe just to speed up a little bit, Hailey, I would just jump to a few strategies to leave you with in the last 5 minutes. Hailey, are you okay with that?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so bottom line is acceptance is a process. So it's not the outcome, it's a process as we are rebuilding our life. And this offers one way of doing it, working with what we have. And typically those are the emotions that we are experiencing. And the idea is if you can't accept it or change it, if you can't change it, then leave it. Okay. And this is a pretty powerful image that I'll share for a moment. Okay. So I wanted to walk you through 3 strategies and maybe leave you a little bit with a bit of homework. Okay. So one of the strategies is that as you're now introduced to this idea of acceptance, and perhaps you decide to take a look into it and you start identifying some of the emotions. The reason for that is to remind you again, is to understand, to start to gather data they're giving to you. And the whole point is to actually then start to better manage your response to them. Just the way in the video it was said, when we see these emotions and we feel them and we identify them, they don't own us. We still own them. They don't give us directives. Okay. So for example, in anger, something that the information typically our body is giving us is that there's some kind of a violation of standards. Perhaps, boundaries are needed, respect, dignity. And when you start realizing that, instead of just acting on it, you can start now to verbalize your potential response from, I can raise my voice, or I can stand up for myself in a more assertive manner. Okay. Same thing with fear. Typical information we get from fear is perception of danger, and we want to start looking for safety. Okay. Shame, typical information we get from shame is about compromised value system, and looking for a way to belong might be a way to go about starting to manage shame. Joy and happiness, information there. This is good for me. I like it. To thrive, grow, and develop. Mastery is the way I want to go, so I can share this happiness. And sadness usually gives us information about some kind of pain, okay, that we are experiencing. That something important is being lost, perhaps. So it's about, finding attachment to either another person or finding attachment to a new self as you're rebuilding your sense of self. Seeking comfort is probably the way to go, and protection of what you have. So I know I went through that quite fast, but those are some things to look at. Also, another tool As I said earlier, you can decide to change situation, you can accept it, or you can let go. If you're changing it, do whatever it is in your control to make a situation or a problem better. Okay, and this is where you seek support, treatment, relaxation strategies, gratitude journal, which I'll talk about in a second. Action plans, things that you can work through as well. If you accept it, comments for yourself, it is as it is, it will pass. This is a normal reaction. In order to let something go, if you decided that's the way to go, the questions to ask yourself is it worth it? Or is this something I can leave, let go of, and move on?
We have a question about slides. We be able to have a copy of the slides that we can email to the participants?
We typically don't share these slides, but if there is something of interest, maybe I can, I can create a little, is it mostly these 3 strategies towards the end?
So wonder if you could share these last few pages on the solutions.
Yes, I will find out if I can, or we will create a little summary. Wonderful. And I'll send to BIS to share with the participants. How does that sound? That's good?
Yep, thank you.
Okay. Last thing, for the rest of this program, so you guys have a few more sessions coming up, we invite you to take 5 minutes once a week to focus your attention on things you're grateful for. So this is your gratitude journal. These may be small things like noticing the strength in your arms or the warmth of the sun, or bigger things like experiencing the love of a child or even the election of a good leader. The idea is to write this journal or notebook according to 3 categories, okay? Things in the world that make my life joyful and that make me grateful. So it's the world. Things about others that I'm grateful for and that I appreciate. And things about myself that I'm grateful for and appreciate. So 3 things to think about. It's the world. What is it in the world that we are grateful for? What is it about others that we are grateful for? And what is it about myself as a person that I am grateful for and that I appreciate? Okay, that's going to be a bit of your homework as you walk through this program. Okay. The end.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much. Are you okay to stick around for a few minutes if anyone has any questions or thoughts?
Sure.
So please feel free again to type in the chat box or just raise your hand and I'll unmute you if you have any questions or comments for Dr. Budisin or for Hailey. Or for Matthew or myself. If you have a question about BIS, feel free to ask that right now too. But while we're waiting, thank you again on behalf of BIST and our team and our board of directors and our members. We certainly do appreciate this is a great resource for our members, so thank you. So there's a question, was the last part based on DBT?
Journal? Is that what, are they referring to the gratitude journal?
Is that what you mean? I'm just conscious of saying names. So the member who typed that in, if you can just let us know if that's based
I can also respond with you without that. No. Okay. Some strategies, they overlap between approaches to treatment. So acceptance is one of them. So this comes from acceptance work, but at the same time, I wouldn't be surprised. It's in other modalities as well.
They're coming in quickly, so I'm just going to scroll back up for a second. There's a question, how can one create their own wheel of emotion?
That's a good question. So my question to that would be, would you be creating new emotions, new names for emotions, or a new combination of the existing emotions? So those are all possibilities, and it's something you can work on and see how to personalize that wheel for sure.
Okay, and while we wait for her to respond back, so as a person with a brain injury, we are often told to accept the new you. We struggle with the changes we are going through and how we are not the person we were before our injury. How do we do this when we might not like the new us?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's a big question. And in treatment, sometimes when I work with clients, these questions are not unusual. I'm not who I was, and I just want to go back. And I just don't necessarily want to be living the life I'm living right now. The idea to go back to OS2 is acceptance, is a process. So and grief is also a process. And part of that process is to never forget who you were, to learn who this new you are. And as you're working through that, to perhaps start to develop a new you, somebody we don't yet know. And that's a process, right? And perhaps there are no right or wrong answers, but learning who this new you is, what it is that you like, what you don't like, is part of recovery, so that it can be yet a new you that comes out of the process.
We have a couple of our questions, and I do see that somebody's hand is raised, so I'm going to read these questions, and then I will unmute the person who's raised their hand. So, wow, a few have come in. So the first, you're popular. Will Dr. Budisin be giving any other sessions?
I would love to. Not in this series. I think you have a pretty good list of some very, very good speakers. But if this is of interest, we can come back next year if this is producing something like this. But thank you.
And we would love to have you back. The next question is, or feeling badly because others have worse conditions and they can move on, adapt, or thrive, and you are having trouble. So it's a bit of a comment as well.
Yeah, I think that comment would require a bit of a discussion, but it sounds like there is process of grieving there that's happening with all the changes in life.
And someone else has said, thank you for all of this. Odd question. It's not an odd question. There are no odd questions. Is there a way to contact Dr. Budisin? Is she taking on patients?
Yeah, Melissa, I mean, you can see, do you have my contact information?
Yes. So, you know what? We can email it out to everyone who participated tonight.
Maybe the Latin Associates link, that can be something to email that, and you can reach out and we can see what the need is and what somebody's looking for, and what's available on our end. I can't comment on that now.
What's the email address for your office?
So I can give you actually my email address in that case. So it's BBUDISIN@ladassociates.ca.
So putting this
everybody has it.
For anyone who still wants it after tonight, if you didn't catch it from the chat box, email us at VIST and we can certainly provide you with that information as well. Another member has just put another resource in the chat box on radical acceptance by Dr. Linham and a YouTube video. And I am now going to unmute Wendy, who's been very patiently waiting. So I have unmuted you if you want to ask your question directly.
I think Wendy's still muted.
Wendy, do you want to mute yourself? I'm giving you permission here. I think you've got no need to help.
The question's already been answered. Thank you.
Okay.
What I'm most looking forward to is some documentation on just about the last 10 minutes of the talk, because I really like those charts and found them useful.
Okay, we'll provide either the chart or a document that summarizes that, and a little bit of a homework for everybody in terms of the journal. No problem. Thank you for attending.
Is there anybody else who wanted to? Do you know why there is no save chat option? No idea. I'll have to take that up with Zoom. I apologize. I don't know why you can't save chats, but if there's any information here that you didn't quite capture because it was answered in the chat earlier, again, if you want to email us at just info@bist.ca, we will get that information to you. So I apologize, that's a Zoom feature that I don't know how to navigate. We are also, this webinar will be available, the video of it will be on our BIST website and on our new BIST YouTube channel, so you can rewatch this webinar once it's posted online. It usually takes us a couple of days to post it, but you can certainly watch it again. Okay, and you're just getting a lot of thank yous, so thank you, much appreciated.
Thank you, everyone.
And if we were all in person, we would be doing this, so thank you so much.
Thanks.
In these, you know, really hard circumstances that we're all in right now, being isolated and being in our homes. It's so nice that we're able to offer this to our members, and we certainly, again, couldn't do it without you taking the time to be here tonight, and of course to Matt and to the team at PIA for sponsoring us and allowing us to provide this for our folks. It's always needed, but certainly in these times it's even more important to all of us that we're able to offer this. So sincerely, thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks.
And I think
Bye.
My pleasure. I love being an attendee to these things too. I always learn so much. That wheel of emotion, I'm never going to look at angry the same way again.
Good. That was the point.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful night.
Bye.